All right, let's talk about something we all think we have a handle on, being awake. But today, we're going to look at it in a completely new light, going way beyond the simple idea of just being switched on.
I mean, this is the fundamental question, right? Awake or asleep? On the surface, it seems like the easiest question in the world. We tend to think of it as a simple light switch. You're either on or you're off. You're conscious or you're unconscious. It's this binary that pretty much defines our entire day. But here's the big idea we're digging into. What if that whole model is just wrong? What if wakefulness isn't one single thing, but a whole spectrum of different qualities?
So to really get our heads around the spectrum, we first have to deconstruct what being awake even means. Because it turns out it's not just one thing.
So this model breaks wakefulness down into 4 core building blocks. First, you've got your baseline substrate. The easiest way to think about this is like your phone's battery. It's your body's fundamental energy level. Then you have your operational mode, which is what you're actually doing with that energy. Focusing, relaxing, whatever. Then there's boundary skill, which is how easily you can kind of drift towards sleep and pull yourself back. And finally, resilience. How quickly do you bounce back when things get disrupted? The key thing to remember is that all of these can change, completely independently of each other.
Okay, so how do these building blocks actually come together? Well, they can combine in different ways to create these really distinct modes of being awake. We're going to walk through 3 of them.
First up is the one we all know intimately. Tension-based wakefulness. This is that state of alertness you have to actively produce. You know the feeling. You're focusing hard on a task. You're pushing through that afternoon slump with coffee. You are actively making yourself stay awake and alert.
But here's a super important point. We usually think of this tension as a bad thing, right? Like we're burning the candle at both ends. But this model suggests its cost totally depends on your underlying baseline. If you're well-rested and your body's in a good state, this kind of focus can actually be very low cost. If you're not, well, that's when it gets really draining.
Okay, next we've got a much more subtle state, boundary-operated wakefulness. This is where you're totally functional, you're awake, but that feeling of pre-sleep is always right there. You're living on the edge of drowsiness, and it's really easy to slip back and forth.
So what does this actually feel like? Well, you can still get things done, and taking a nap becomes a real, viable option. But, and this is the part we often just ignore, it can come with this subtle, persistent discomfort, kind of like a faint instability or a mild negative vibe that you might not even notice because you're just so used to it.
And all of this brings us to the most fascinating part of this framework. It's a potential third mode that represents a huge, qualitative shift in the actual subjective experience of what it feels like to be awake.
This quote just nails the feeling perfectly. Imagine not having to do anything to be awake. No tension, no mental effort, no fighting off sleepiness. Wakefulness is just there. It's your default setting, not something you constantly have to prop up.
The descriptions of this state are really specific and really interesting. It's described as feeling clear, thin, and transparent. That pull towards sleep feels really distant, not right next door. Those negative undertones we just talked about, pretty much gone. And crucially, this state isn't driven by what you're doing or what you're thinking. It just exists on its own. And I love this metaphor. This state isn't rigid or fragile. It acts as a stable floor. From this solid foundation, you can temporarily add that light, low-cost tension whenever you need to focus, but you always return to this stable, effortless base. It's about elasticity, not being brittle.
So let's just clarify what this state isn't. It's not that classic, buzzy, high-energy feeling driven by adrenaline, that sense of urgency or pressure. And it's not that dopamine-fueled pull of motivation. But, and this is so important, the absence of those things doesn't feel like numbness or apathy or depression. It's a calm, clear presence.
Okay, before we go any further, we have to put a huge asterisk on all of this because it's incredibly important to understand the scope and the limitations here. This is about observation, not advice.
Yeah, the source material is extremely clear on this point. The goal is not to tell you how to live or how to sleep. It is simply, and I'm quoting here, to structurally describe changes in the quality of wakefulness as observed subjectively. It's a map, not a set of directions.
And this is probably the single most important takeaway for anyone exploring these ideas. Just because something feels easy or good, subjectively, that is not proof that it is healthy or safe for you in the long term. Feeling good is a signal, a clue to pay attention to, but it is not objective data. So how does this all fit together in the end? Well, it's not about choosing one mode over the others. The idea is to have an integrated system. It starts with an improved, stable baseline wakefulness. Then you add skill in navigating that boundary with sleep. You work to reduce all that metabolic and emotional noise. And then you can use that low-cost, tension-based wakefulness only when you really need it, knowing you can recover quickly.
And that leaves us with the final, really thought-provoking question. This whole framework just shifts the entire focus. Maybe the most important question isn't about how long you manage to stay awake, but instead, what is the quality of your wakefulness while you are?